Well, good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Well, welcome to the newly renovated forum at TU Business. Thanks to the generosity of One Oak, we have this newly remodeled auditorium. Many of you, I know some of you were here in school, and you probably noticed that the seats that were 40 years old have been replaced, and we actually have the latest and greatest technology, which appears to be working well. So thank you all for being here. It's a really exciting day, I know, for all of you and for me. As I was reminded way back in the day, I was involved in the initial launch of some of this work, and I know many of you have been involved in it for decades more. So it is great to see it come to fruition and with such great expertise and support. This mobility innovation strategy is really going to take Tulsa, continue to take Tulsa into the leadership in policy and technical action plan launched by the city of Tulsa with all of you to lower barriers for deploying emerging transportation technologies and making sure that we have equitable access to technology to transportation. And that's the aim, really. And all of you that have been involved in this know how important this is in our region. And we have leaders here. We've had people involved from public, from private, philanthropic, federal government, state, local, all coming together to make this innovation strategy a fruition. You all know that transportation really impacts our lives every single day, whether it is making sure you can get to your job to support your family, getting to your healthcare, education, access to healthy foods, recreation, and really everything we do in our lives today. So we're here to take the next step in this exciting plan towards efficient, affordable, innovative, first-class mobility that will connect all Tulsans, regardless of age, income, and ability. Now, I want to recognize everyone in this audience is special to this plan. I want to recognize a few people, and it's always as I see Chris Bench walk in, he will appreciate this. It's always a risk when you start recognizing people if you didn't recognize someone. So if I didn't recognize you after I say thank you for being here, please let me know. We have State House Representative Melissa Provenzano. We have District 3 County Commissioner, Rogers County Commissioner Ron Burrows, Christy Gillespie, Vice Mayor of Broken Arrow. Thank you for being here. We have John Fothergill, our County Treasurer. We have Isaac Akim from the Federal Transportation Authority, James Wagner, who you'll hear from shortly, who was involved in the beginning stages of this plan as well, and now serves us so well as the Chief Financial Officer of the City of Tulsa. Cayenne Camus, who leads the newly launched Tulsa Economic Opportunity Authority. Biplav Huda, the Director of Transportation at INCOG. And Scott Marr is not with us today, who's the General Manager of Tulsa Transit, who came to Tulsa in February and is doing a great job in really leading Tulsa Transit. So anyone I didn't recognize who's willing to raise their hand. All right, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it, and I know we all do. So before I hand it off to James, let me just give you a few housekeeping rules or items. The bathrooms are that way. Feel free to get up and get refreshments in the hallway if you feel like you need something sweet. One of the things we do in the dean's office is we keep chocolates in the lobby for our students and faculty. So if you need some chocolates, go that way to where it says Office of the Dean. Here's the agenda today. We'll be hearing some remarks from James at the City of Tulsa about a few of the mobility initiatives that we currently have underway, and it's amazing how far we've come. And after hearing about those projects, we'll hear from our great consultants on the mobility innovation strategy, Jason Schreiber from Stantec and Kelly Coiner. And then we'll move into our Q&A and our champion session. Now, the Mobility Champions working session is where we're going to split up into breakout sessions, and we're going to get some real work done that we will be ready to work together to launch. So I know we're on a tight schedule. I want to say thank you to Michelle. We should all give Michelle a round of applause here. And she's done an amazing job in organizing this event. She has left no detail unturned. So we're following as I said, a tight schedule. And for our online viewers, you can submit a question to the chat anytime, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my friend, the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Tulsa, James Wagner. James.
Thank you. I will always refer to Mayor Taylor, and that's Dean Taylor. Sometimes I do pinch myself a little bit that I have the opportunity to stand up here, be introduced by Mayor Taylor, and get to talk about some of this work. In 2017, Mayor Bynum and I had an opportunity to go to an event called City Lab, which is an event that's organized by Bloomberg Philanthropies. Mayors from all over the world come together for this event. And while we were there, they have sessions that mayors are working on all sorts of challenging issues. In fact, really, they bring mayors together for that because mayors are working on the most challenging issues. So those range from food insecurity, public safety, civic engagement, innovation. But there was one topic that really caught my eye, and the mayors as well, and that was autonomous vehicles. And at that time, they were starting to test autonomous vehicles in Pittsburgh, in particular. Carnegie Mellon University had a partnership there, and so we came back and started something that we called the Urban Mobility Innovation Team, and started trying to think about how can we bring together people in local government, county government, tribal government, people in academia and in industry to try to look at that problem, or not that problem, but that opportunity, the opportunity of autonomous vehicles. So this work is really a product that culminated in a partnership between the City of Tulsa and INCOG, who led that in the beginning stages on identifying and solving mobility problems. So this team surveyed the public, they hired a team of experts, and organized a steering committee of leaders in government, industry, academia, technology, and research. Many of those people are in the room today, and to kind of give an assessment of Tulsa's transportation ecosystem. And so through that analysis, they identified the most pressing transportation challenges that Tulsa faces, including affordable and reliable transit options, connections to major employment hubs, and safe and convenient biking and walking routes. Now, we recognize that the importance of addressing transportation barriers to ensure that our citizens have access to employment, food, healthcare, recreation, and each other. By improving mobility in our community, we envision a Tulsa where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their age, income, and ability. So from this study, we found that local organizations are already leading the way toward improved transportation using advanced technology. Tulsa's home to the development of electric vehicles, on-demand rides, drone delivery, and improving public transit. These are forms of smart mobility which leverage technology to improve the user experience, reduce costs, and improve safety. To address our current challenges and push toward a more convenient and efficient mobility, the strategy you'll hear about today is designed to grow our community's assets in mobility innovation. Through partnerships spanning sectors and across the Tulsa metro area, we aim to channel the benefits of this innovation toward our community. So today, on behalf of Mayor Bynum and the City of Tulsa, I'm proud to take part in the launch of the Tulsa Mobility Innovation Strategy. Resulting from a process of civic engagement, it's a plan that will address long-standing inequality, increase economic mobility, and improve livability for our neighborhoods. I'd like to thank everyone in this room who helped make this plan possible. I remember the moment that we kind of had the idea to do this, and it's so great to see it come to this point. But the hardest part, but maybe the most exciting part, is now ahead of us. The next steps will take something that I've come to recognize as a key element to any work like this: patient persistence. I hope we will take the same data-informed, community-driven approach that has been the hallmark of the Tulsa Mobility Innovation Strategy. Together, we'll keep striving for safer streets, better transportation options, and embrace technology that will help achieve those goals. I'm so glad to be here today and glad to be a part of this. I'm going to turn it back to Kathy.
Thanks,
Mayor
James.
Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. It's exciting, and I think we do owe a great thanks to the leadership of Mayor Bynum and to James and INCOG for putting this at the top of their priority list. It will be a game changer in the city of Tulsa. So I want you to hear from a few of Tulsa's leaders in mobility, and they're going to share some of the initiatives that you may or may not know about that are underway today. So to start us off, longtime leader at INCOG, Brian Bigby, who's the principal economic development planner. Brian served as a legislative analyst and a transportation specialist at the Oklahoma Department of Transportation before we got him to join INCOG in early 2017. He has been leading the Tulsa Regional Advanced Mobility Cluster Project, which was recently chosen, as you may know, in a very exciting way by the U.S. Economic Development Administration as one of 60 finalists in the $1 billion Build Back Better Regional Challenge. So Brian, let us know what's going on.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, I put together a kind of a presentation for you because this is an extremely important initiative that was put together through a solid coalition. On March 11th, 2021, the Historic American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law, known as the ARPA. Under the ARPA, the U.S. Economic Development Administration, referred to as EDA, was allocated $3 billion in supplemental funding to assist communities nationwide in their efforts to build back better by accelerating economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic and building local economies that will be resilient to future economic shocks. To do so, EDA made this funding available through a series of 6 innovative challenges, one of which was the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, known as the BBBRC to those of us who love acronyms. The project that will be touched on today was one of the 60 finalists, as Mayor Taylor mentioned. We were one of 60 finalists out of 529 submitted nationwide. We are invited to participate in the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenge Phase 2 competition for a $100 million transformational federal investment to bolster our region's economy. Over the last 8 months, the regional coalition that you see right here was assembled, spent countless hours developing an economic development proposal to fuel the growth of an industrial cluster at the intersection of advanced aerial mobility, advanced batteries, and electrification, of ground mobility. This project is one that is anchored in innovation, entrepreneurship, and advanced manufacturing for the purposes of creating a resilient economy during a period of economic shock. This project is also being pursued at a time when COVID-19 has greatly impacted the region, which has seen a 10.4% decrease in employment and regional wage decline of 8.1% from January of 2020. It is being pursued at a time when stagnation threatens to shrink the region's economy, which is over-reliant on declining industries and faces automation pressures that could displace at-risk workers, furthering economic inequality. Our 14-county project impact area is well positioned to be a hub for advanced mobility. It has a strong foundation for the EM industry, such as a higher education, research, and expertise that needs to be expanded and better aligned to industry needs, and engaged social sector that has increased support for the region's economic diversification, transportation infrastructure, and existing industry in aerospace and manufacturing. Our advantage in this industry is also supported by existing assets that are hard to replicate in other areas of the state and the nation, such as the Osage Nation Skyway 36 Aerospace Research and Development Park, which has existing runway, vertical liftoff, hangar, administrative space. The Tulsa Port of Catoosa in Rogers County, which is the nation's largest ice-free inland multimodal port at the end of the McClellan-Kerr Arkansas River navigation system. The 9,000-acre Mid-America Industrial Park, and the recently created Tulsa Authority for Economic Opportunity. These assets put our region at an advantage over others. However, several gaps must be addressed for the region to become a leader in the AEM space at a time when it must diversify its economy. The proposal submitted to EDA for this challenge will leverage federal, public, private, and philanthropic investments to support 6 component projects throughout the region. Collectively, the component projects proposed by the coalition are complementary and aligned to the gaps the region must address to catalyze an advanced mobility ecosystem. Our goal is to create the only regional AM clusters with world-class research, testing, and manufacturing capabilities in the country. The projects that you see here include an advanced mobility workforce program, Robson Industrial Park Development, the Tulsa Port of Inola Industrial Park, a flight corridor, a 114 nautical mile flight corridor, a Launchpad Research Center, an aviation and advanced aerial mobility hangar. There's more to the project than the creation of a new industrial cluster. The component projects that make up the TRAM project, as we like to call it, were purposefully developed to address the coalition's most significant goals, something of a generational obligation, to develop an economic ecosystem that promotes growth and innovation to address historical inequities, such as those resulting from the attempted systematic elimination of the Osage and the 1921 Greenwood Race Massacre, by creating quality jobs for residents of the Tulsa region and generational wealth. Our specific metrics of success reflect these goals, such as growth of regional jobs in advanced mobility sectors, improvement in regional innovation index, reducing demographic gaps in employment and median wages for historically disadvantaged groups, racial minorities, and women, increasing regional wage growth through quality jobs created by targeted and supplier firms. Based on the occupational data for the targeted industries for the 11,000 to 21,000 initial jobs expected to be created through the 3 construction projects, the average employee wages are 30 to 40% higher than median state wages and 3 to 4% higher than their surrounding area median wages. A significant amount of these jobs that are projected to be created through these 6 component projects do not require formal 2-year or 4-year post-secondary degree. To ensure that these opportunities are distributed equitably, we will implement or incentivize employee recruiting practices that target historically disadvantaged populations, racial minorities, and women. This includes incorporating DEI policies into the selection process for construction and leasing projects. Should our region win this award, the near-term catalytic funding will allow us to leverage and build from the full potential of our existing foundation, which was described earlier, to become a national leader in advanced mobility, innovation, and development. Each project has sustainability strategies in place to ensure the cluster's longevity, such as cross-project oversight by TAO, Tulsa Authority for Economic Opportunity. Advanced Mobility Strategic Working Group will be chaired by Tulsa Innovation Labs and comprised of members of the coalition, with new members added over time. And a regional advisory group overseen by the Tulsa Regional Chamber and INCOG will be comprised of regional, corporate, and community leaders that have been engaged throughout the application process, the phase 1 and the phase 2 application process, including the DEI working group members. Community engagement will be critical for the cluster to achieve its equitable goals, and we have embedded community participation and equity into the design of our projects. TAO, in its cross-project oversight role, will directly coordinate engagement with community-based organizations and lead efforts to ensure the project incorporates economic benefit for local residents, for all projects in Tulsa's municipal borders, and will provide strategic guidance on these types of activities for projects outside of the boundaries. The expected outcome of this project, what you see here, will occur over the next 5 to 10 years. We expect to see, should it be awarded, a reduction in unemployment and wage gap between demographic groups, increased employment opportunities for rural residents, as the Inola Industrial Park will be located outside of the city of Tulsa, and the employment area will include rural and coal impacted jobs. And advanced mobility workforce programs are expected to provide 350 to 500 annual workers across all programs. And jobs at the industrial parks are expected to have a 38 to 47% higher wages than the state median. In closing, for an innovation strategy to succeed, an innovation ecosystem needs to exist. This tram project was purposefully developed to do that. To those that are a part of this coalition and are here today, I want to thank each of you. This project could not have been developed without your dedication and contributions. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
And that's
Brian.
all I
That's
got.
exciting. In my prior roles as mayor and secretary of commerce, as I talked to my contemporaries across the nation, this is what Tulsa does really well. This is what Oklahoma does really well. The collaboration, the community involvement that Brian just talked about. And that is why thanks for thinking really big. And I have great confidence that this will succeed. So it's my privilege now to announce an exciting initiative. The University of Tulsa wants to be a leader in this work and support the work that each of you have done in this room. So I want to announce today that the university will launch the 5th plank of the City of Tulsa Mobility Innovation Strategy. We will host the TU Mobility Innovation Challenge with participation of all of the colleges at the University of Tulsa, the Collins College of Business, Arts and Sciences, Engineering, Oxley, and Law. In the spring of 2023, this campus-wide Business Innovation Challenge will host multidisciplinary teams that will develop innovative business ideas to address high-priority mobility challenges directed by industry. These teams will be assigned a faculty, a government, and an academic advisor and mentor. They'll receive a budget for developing their plan. Industry, government, and faculty judges will determine the winner with a focus on plans that have an opportunity to receive funding for execution. We're excited to announce this today and look for spring of 2023 in this auditorium to come and hear those innovative plans. And now we will turn to the next part of our program. You've heard about these great projects, and I know there's so much to celebrate. I've talked to our friends at Engineering and Tulsa Innovation Labs that have been working with Brian. We want to talk now. I know that Scott Marr could not join us today, but there are some other things that are happening. You know about this machine. I don't know how many of you are cyclists. I know we have a lot of INCOG people that are cyclists. And Tulsa's Bike Share nonprofit had a 300% increase in ridership in 2021. They have 8 square miles, 50 stations, 13 stations planned for this year alone. So we should give a round of applause to this machine's executive director, Katie Sawicki, and the rest of her team. Thank you guys for the work. I know it's been easy, but I can just remember Bike Share people were at every single when you were doing the bond package, they were there at every single thing saying, this is what we need to do to bring Tulsa forward. And of course, we know, we've seen in the news recently, Canoo is building their electric vehicle factory in Pryor's Mid-America Industrial Park. Mid-America Industrial Park is taking off. It's exciting. Rogers County is doing some exciting things. An R&D center, a software center. They're going to bring 2,700 new jobs to this region. That is going to be something that lifts us all. And they partnered with our great philanthropic partner, the George Kaiser Family Foundation, to create a workforce development program for local industry. So we should give a round of applause to Canoo and to GKFF representatives that are here with us today. To some of you to know that Tulsa is actually a regional and national hub for research and development of unmanned aerial systems. And those aren't the ones that I operate in my backyard. They're drones that are much more sophisticated than mine. So the Osage Nation and the great Tulsa Innovation Labs. I don't see Nick Latta here with us today, but they are doing some great work and really pioneering this advanced aerial mobility industry. So we thank them for the innovation and the work that they are doing to bring Tulsa to the forefront of advanced aerial mobility. So with that, it's time to welcome to the stage the two principal consultants for the Mobility Innovation Strategy. And I just want to say, if you've had a chance to review even the summary, I'll say I haven't read the thick book yet. This is an amazing, inspiring summary. And we know the work that went behind it. It always, when you choose a consultant, you always hope that you got the one that really understands your community and your vision and your opportunities. And certainly I would say with Jason Schreiber and Kelly Coyner, we found that here in Tulsa. So innovation for mobility and Stantec, let's look at the plan. Thank you.
Let's get through some of these slides fast.
Should have taken it so I could advance.
Oh, these are good slides. Wait a minute, I want to back up to one. I want to back up to this one. This special announcement was actually really significant. So now I know not to call you dean, you're mayor. This is great.
I can't have a job.
So, I mean, this type of a thing, an innovation challenge, starting at the university, spreading throughout the region, that kind of ethos, that's the kind of thing that we want to hear about. And of course, all these partners and more is excellent. So I'm Jason Schreiber. I'm a senior principal at Stantec. I was the principal in charge and ultimately wound up being project manager for this effort. And the real brains behind it all was Kelly Coyner. She's with Innovation for Mobility now. And we hope that we've done a decent job of summarizing what we learned. And I'm going to start off by highlighting some of the key things. So much that's happened already here that we've heard about this morning is excellent, and it's stuff that was underway and being thought of throughout the course of the development of a mobility innovation strategy. And it's really refreshing to actually see this stuff underway, whether it's the deployment of these technologies, it's the great announcements by Canoe, work going on at the Skyway, certainly the Innovation Challenge and more. But I wanted to back up to where we were at the beginning, because this is, in my mind, really, really fundamental to everything and anything we're trying to solve. The words that both James and Brian said are on message about what is needed in the Tulsa region. We spent the first year just collecting information, trying to understand it, trying to map it, talking to stakeholders, talking to the public, doing the surveys, trying to do our homework. And you know, these areas of need, they're not uncommon in many areas around the United States. They're almost everywhere in the United States, but there are some areas of really particularly strong need in Tulsa where there are people who literally cannot get to good meals very easily, that it requires too much time and money to be able to, that healthcare is difficult for them to get to when many of the good services are on the south side of the city, far from where many other residents live, and how just to be able to get to many of the good paying jobs and explosive growth on the Broken Arrow corridor, for instance, has been really difficult for folks, especially those who are dependent on transit and have to transfer. Students, so many schools in so many areas that could be where students walk to school instead of get dropped off from school. Forget high technology, we could use some basic sidewalks, but we need to also think about the kinds of things that can complement and make that better, because a lot of folks in the greater Tulsa area, in Tulsa itself, are sort of trapped and don't have good transit connections. And I can't say anything more about the importance of that basic form of mobility, which is transit. This message was heard loud and clear by everybody you've already heard here today, by the planners in the city and definitely at INCOG, and by many other folks in the region. And this vision statement, it ends very importantly on economic opportunities for all. Like, that truly is what any strategy really in the modern era needs to be about. And to say that a mobility strategy can't catalyze this is being very short-sighted. In fact, the opportunities here to build on that vision and to really harness what we're all talking about here today for something much greater is really what it's all about. And that's really a message that all of us need to take home. These basic principles of understanding how to make access to jobs, healthcare, food, everything more equitable, and to do it in a sustainable way. It's not just climate sustainability, it's being able to preserve a system that works for everybody for a long time, that isn't impacted by budgetary cuts and operating on transit. And it's those things that can keep it going well that achieve the economic growth that we all want here, that anybody wants in a region like this with all this opportunity deserves. So I'm going to talk through the two kind of key programmatic areas at the beginning, equity and economy, and then Kelly's going to finish up with policy and partnerships, which as far as I'm concerned are some of the most important things that we recommended out of this study. But equity and the equity program, and it's, you know, you can go, please read the large report. It'll be available on the web soon. There's a sample out front. There's a summary, of course. Equity, first and foremost, while it has to do with all forms of mobility, really centers on transit. I do wish Scott was here earlier, so I'm now going to put on my Tulsa Transit hat and say, yes, this is the thing that really can root change and opportunity. And frankly, Tulsa Transit has done an incredible job, obviously, with the Peoria BRT, now another east-west BRT on Route 66 being planned. The idea of expanding that, they'd already started with the Go Pass. How can that form of access to everybody go further and become mobility as a service? Microtransit deployments. They're already planning one in Northwest Tulsa next year. How can that become pervasive throughout the region? How can that evolve into shared mobility? And ultimately, one of our breakouts today is about the idea of mobility hubs, focused in this case on grocery stores, but their idea of transit hubs being points of last mile departure for other modes of transportation. Many more details behind all these projects. We can talk about them later. The second program really has two parts to it. And this is about the economy. As we said, this is the bottom line. As important as transit is, we're doing everything in service of economic development and opportunity. And it really comes down to the first half of this being people, training of people, the types of programs, inspiring people through an innovation challenge to be able to pay attention to things. We had a very detailed economic study done by our partner, Terry Clower. That was a big part of the Build Back Better challenge, focusing on gaps in the region that could really be targeted, that resulted in some of the strategies that we're seeing here, being able to think about accelerating and incubating the training and the opportunities. But also, the other part of this is to attract those workers, to make people who are in current industries, and we're talking about instrumentation, the aircraft industry is mentioned, lots of advanced, smart technological machinery, that knowledge, transferring it and people wanting to work in new realms means they should be a part of it too. And so having access to those shared forms of transportation, having this machine where workers work is a way to get to work. Having that type of mobility is fundamental to the people side of an economic program. But on the business side, we also want to attract new businesses, not just Canoe. Let's go further. Let's see who else can come here. How can we have centers for innovation? Can we have a cyber district, maybe in downtown or at a university? Can we attract more test bed opportunities, not just for drones, but for other forms of shared and smart mobility? And can we change how we look at land development? Can we attract things like form-based codes and changes to zoning to encourage people to do something that might otherwise be considered an industry right in their backyards, in their walkable neighborhoods, along the Peoria BRT, to provide more access to innovation that creates the new economy, the higher technology economy? Policy. Kelly, you get to go from there.
So I spent a lot of my time working with firms that want to innovate and governments that want to innovate. And the thing that they all think is that it's the technology that's the innovation. It's actually not. It's the things that you need to change to make it so the technology can help business, help people, and create a sustainable environment. And so what I like to say is this, I'm like alliteration. So pilots, partnerships, planning, and policy. You've heard a lot about planning. This next section is on policy. And the first one is, how do you take all this multiplicity of data, how do you take it to drive your policies, but also to find new economic opportunities? There are a number of sort of suggestions in the report about how we might do this, and it really starts with the city and the council of governments looking at what are the use cases for data and what are the governance practices and the privacy and the shared opportunity policy questions. This is interesting. It's just shifted on this side, but not on the other side. There we go. Did I miss one? Yes. A second area of policy is in land use. And as someone who started her transportation work many decades ago at the local level working on transportation, I was appalled to find out that what I was expected to learn was how the land use zoning worked. And it is integral to how do you move things, how you deal with parking requirements and the like. It is not the thing that's going to make you popular at a backyard barbecue or a cocktail party, but you can ask my husband, it hasn't stopped me yet. But there are a list of things that we work very closely with the Tulsa planning director on what are the kinds of things that she ought to be looking for and helping the city think through as they work through code changes. This is the one that makes my heart pitter patter, although I would change it to say accelerate ACE's innovation, which is accessible, automated, connected, electric, and shared innovation. And there's a series of recommendations in this. We're going to hear more about some of the things that are in the first year. And it's really, as you see, it cuts across these sort of different areas, but you need to figure out what your policies are about doing these pilots. You need to understand the new legislation that's passed. You know, I haven't spent a lot of time physically in Tulsa, but I feel like I've been living in Oklahoma. I testified, you know, with the legislature on looking at this legislative work, and I'm really pleased to see that they've moved forward on that. And then there are a series of things that are policies about how we run government. And I would say that one of the biggest obstacles to innovation in the public sector, no matter where you are, is procurement. It just doesn't work. And there are opportunities to do things that fine tune it, and there are things that can really change the incentives and the structures around it while preserving a level playing field for everyone to compete. Partnerships is the last P. And I don't feel like I'm speaking to the choir on partnerships because we've just listened to this really important presentation on the mobility corridors. But you need to be intentional about it. And we see an added impetus for it as we see this monumental amount of funding going into infrastructure of all kinds that really requires very close cooperation between levels of government and partnerships with the private sector and partnerships with the philanthropic community. Okay, this is the fun part. This is the bringing the plan to life. And I'm going to hit the pause button for one second because I realized that I wanted to recognize one particular person in the room that, you know, this is always dangerous, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that is Adrienne James, who was the project manager on this before Michelle. And one of the things I would say is that she's all about bringing it to life. She's funny and relentless, and there are so many things that she pushed us forward on and worked to, you know, seed the clouds on some of these initiatives. So I've just mentioned that she's now working on electric vehicle charging, not just here, but across the country. So we talked some about the various accomplishments. We could probably do a whole afternoon session on the accomplishments that you've made over time. And it's, you know, it is a delight to have seen these things come to life, from the bid and the parklets legislation. it was though, sort of maybe not week to week or day to day, but month to month and quarter to quarter, we could see real progress as we went through putting the project together. Okay, so this is going to relate to what we want to do to implement this. And so it's really key that we figure out how to build the infrastructure, if you will, to sustain that patience and perseverance that James talked about. And we're going to be looking to you to answer these questions. And the objective as we go forward is to talk about where do we start? And my job is to talk about the 5 areas that we work through with the city and with NCOG as what we'll call sort of the first year projects, with the things that can be very catalytic. The first one, surprise, surprise, is create an innovation challenge. And I think that, you see what the benefits are for this. And what the dean didn't mention is that she only talked about her year 1 plans. She has a sustained vision about how it builds on the academic community and the resources and the innovation labs here in terms of moving forward. Microtransit. You are getting ready to pilot microtransit. And your key is to move forward on that. You may find some ways to move forward on it even faster than currently planned, and to look at how it becomes sustained deployment. So who here knows what microtransit is? So microtransit, some would say, is the Uber of transit. I don't particularly like that image, but it's basically the idea that we could use those technologies that Uber and Lyft and others use to have mobility on demand, so that we can use those assets that we have better to serve areas that don't need a bus 24 hours a day, but they do need a cost-effective way to get to work, to school, to healthcare, to recreation, to entertainment, and the like. And I had fun talking to the vice mayor a little bit about the thoughts that they're looking at in Broken Arrow to address that particular piece. There are, I think, people on the live feed who've been working on this project. I wanted to linger on it a bit. We are not going to have a breakout group on this, although it may cut across some of the other groups, because Tulsa Transit has made so much progress on this one already. We want to move forward with the piloting a grocery store hub. These hubs are really important for connecting people and the things that they need. You've landed an opened Oasis since we started this project. Jason's going to be leading a discussion on that particular topic. These are the new P4s. And this is, Brian Bigby is going to help us with this conversation, but it's really looking at how do we take the work that he's done, building on the traditions of this region, and make it so it's replicable, and that we keep tapping into over time. And then we're looking for ways to accelerate AV innovation. And we put out sort of 3 different ways to do this. We want to focus today on piloting multiple different automated use cases, maybe in a campus environment, or maybe some of you will have a different idea. Campus environment is a pretty broad term. It could be like the University of Tulsa, or it could be at one of your 2 ports. It could be in a business context going forward. And there's an opportunity there. One of the things I think is really important, particularly since you mentioned the Bloomberg experience, is to talk about where we are now with these technologies and what's changed. When we started this project, the rage was focusing on automated shuttles. And that's still a really important application. It's a low-speed application that has far fewer safety components to it. But as we moved through the pandemic, we've realized that we have huge issues on the delivery of things, whether it's long distance and long haul trucking, or mid distance, or at the very end of it. And so we've seen new types of vehicles move forward. And I was excited to learn last week, I had a meeting with Kodiak about they're looking at over the road uses of a commercial vehicle in Oklahoma, so it doesn't just stop in my home state of Texas. But there are a lot of different ways that we look at it. I think another thing that's really important is the intersection that automation has with electrification. And I think that, you know, I called Canoe proof of concept when I heard about the announcement, which is that they're building a platform for electric vehicles that will also be able to sustain automated vehicles across the board. Are you with Canoe by chance? Yeah, you worked with them. I see a nodding head back here. And so it is a really critical opportunity. We've got opportunities to look at how do we advance local businesses that are advanced in the field of electric charging. And that is something that we'll want to look at as sort of how we pull those things together. I think that is the end of the formal presentation, and we're ready to move to questions and answers.
Michelle, do you have any questions from the live stream? Thanks. So I think this is really, thank you all for an amazing presentation. I think that deserves it makes for a great consulting project and a great partnership. I mean, you've heard about an exciting opportunity we have from Brian. You've heard the leadership of the mayor, these great consultants, the leadership of NCOG, and many of our elected representatives, philanthropic and corporate. I mean, I think it's go time. So what questions do people have about what the next steps are forward, or any questions about the presentations? I'm only the moderator. I'm not answering the questions, but I will. Any questions? I know how to use the system, so you'll be on the mic. So somebody, Amy, you need to ask me a question so I can prove that I know it, since I didn't advance the slides for Michelle.
I can this off a question. Do I need to stand up, or am I good just to?
I can stand up if this microphone is now on green, which means it's listening to you.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think it would just be interesting to know at this stage in the development strategy, was there anything about Tulsa or our region that stood out to you as particularly challenging that we should keep in mind to solve for when we go into our breakout discussions?
I certainly have a strong opinion.
You go first.
He was nodding as I asked.
I mean, you have a region that I think you're all well aware is definitely a very auto-oriented region. It's not like that is an exception in the United States, but in this region, there's a huge reliance on the automobile. And yeah, if it's a great automated future robotic car, which is still decades away, that's, you know, a great opportunity, but that wouldn't change the problems that your region has as a result of that auto orientation, which is that spending is often there to continue to keep the roads functioning for the cars and to not necessarily have the money for a sidewalk or to put it into more transit infrastructure. That zoning is oriented to be able to encourage those travel patterns. And so there are lots of just single uses that require folks to drive between them. And we also have parking requirements that support that and spread out the world more. And if we were able to have some faith and to just look at successes locally, successes from around the country that prove that if we, you know, take the risk and, you know, have a lane or two here and there dedicated to another form of transportation and suffer the pain of a few more seconds on our otherwise one of the fastest commutes in the country, that we also complement that with an approach to how we do land development and zoning that doesn't require as much parking, and that actually encourages everything to be mixed together. And then you could get nodes, whether they're at transit stops or the future mobility hubs that we're all trying to talk about. Those are leaps of faith, but they've been proven. They exist around the country. And I think this region has a challenge to overcome those things. I think what you don't have is a lack of people interested in making those changes happen. And in particular, what you don't have is a lack of people who really want the technology to come in behind that all. And what we've seen here today. And I think that's a key ingredient. And hopefully it'll catalyze a lot of those other changes that take more time and political willpower. Let the private technology lead the way, arguably.
I don't disagree with anything that Jason said. What I would say is a particular thing is choosing and focusing and having a strategic idea about how you implement. Because you have this culmination of things in this region right now that have taken decades to get here. You have some of the similar ones that sort of pull you back, but I use the term sort of catalytic funding. I don't know, some would say maybe our house is on fire with funding, right? But there's this opportunity with the combination of the different pieces of activity to make a leapfrog forward on a variety of places. And I know you know it particularly well, Amy, with respect to electric vehicle charging, but I spend a lot of my sort of more pontificating time on the question of autonomous vehicles and infrastructure and what the intersection is and how do you move forward on that. And one of the things that I'm really struck by is a discussion about the electric vehicle. I mean, well, for one, as I always say, oh, really? Autonomous vehicles don't need a roadway, but internal combustion engines needed the interstate system. But even going sort of further than that, the recent work on the electric vehicle of why it didn't catch on before, because it actually preceded the internal combustion engine, was not because it cost more. It's because you couldn't get access to electricity. We actually had a battery that would take you about 70 miles, but we were putting our electricity originally in industrial applications. And so it just underscores that all these things are interconnected and the infrastructure choices that you make are also interconnected. So a long-winded answer. Who else?
Great. Other questions? Any questions from the, oh, go ahead. Yes.
So I know you guys did that study for the regionals. But given, ODOT and ODOT is present here in the meeting, have you guys consulted with ODOT, given that they manage all the interstate highway, and see their perspective in coming onto regional mobility?
ODOT was a stakeholder in the process early. Much of the focus of the study really did not look at the interstates, though. It was very much focused on the neighborhoods and places and areas that were in great. But the interstates, from the perspective of the things that we saw rise to the top in terms of need, were not at the top at all. It was more the local streets, the local access, the transit systems, access to jobs, where the hubs and the ways for folks to be able to get to those services were in the neighborhoods. That really became the focus. And the focus for opportunities, the interstate system is going to be a great conduit for electric cars and electric transportation and freight. And that's already moving forward in the state of Oklahoma. When we start to look at Tulsa specifically, the needs here go much beyond that, have everything to do with, like I said, schools and healthy foods and healthcare and jobs access. Those are local street, local circulation problems and land use problems. Those became really the biggest and most important things for us to focus on.
Good point. Go ahead.
Are there any really innovative corporate partnerships that you've seen in getting people to work that you should consider?
Yes. So there are all varieties of ways that can be done. One is for employers to partner with the transit system and use those assets to move people or to subsidize it. This is a huge issue, is that everywhere across the board we've had huge ridership declines. I know that's no different here. So that's one. The other is in employee-owned or provided systems. And there are interesting examples. We tend to focus on like the Googles and the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and the Amazons and those particular systems. I have found that the more interesting ones have been for essential workers, including correctional facilities, and also for where you're bringing people into a central location for a factory. So, for example, a canoe type of environment. And the interesting partnership is where you marry the local transportation system with employer-provided transportation, and you add where technology becomes innovative so that you can take many people to one point. And that's, we're beginning to see some real breakthroughs in that technology of people being able to do that. The most interesting thing I saw in the pandemic was some of the West Coast tech employers decide that they would like to be able to give rides to people who weren't their employees. And that those, I think, we'll see more of as on the West, on the East Coast, people go back to work. You guys have just been at work, right? So I'd be glad to talk to you more about that.
And I'd just like to follow up really fast. You of those employers who subscribe or TMA on their own through a demand management program, whatever, to all of those great opportunities, haven't done the basic parking cost math, which is very simple. You will have to build a parking garage. If you have to put any investment in parking, it's $20,000 a space to build it.
Or 40,000 if you're in Dallas.
And it's no less than $150 a month. How many you pay to park? That's $150 a month subsidy for you to park if you ever park in a garage. So as soon as you see that, I mean, if I was putting half of that into transit and all the things we just talked about, I can save money as long as I'm not required to build the garage that's big.
That's a great point. That's a great point, is the city looks at land use planning. Other questions?
And had your hand.
I just gonna note, I think we're trying to do some innovative strategies, particularly on targeted transit access to employers. I think there's like a conundrum between raising awareness among riders and then getting a critical mass of riders, and also getting the employers to stay engaged long enough, and the transit system also giving it enough time. It's just, James knows about the struggles that we've had with the Workforce Express network, and there's not a perfect solution. And it's more of just an observation, like we're trying, but not necessarily succeeding at this point. My hope is that we'll keep looking for solutions, because there's far too many people who don't have a reliable personal car or a personal car at all. And we have some great and concentrated employment centers that if we can just get people to, they can increase their own.
There's data all across the country from multiple efforts of what is basically known as parking cash out. Pay somebody to take the bus as opposed to just pay for their bus pass, $20 a month, and you'll get them to ship. It's a huge amount of just recognition. Because right now in Tulsa, the majority of people who are on the bus don't have a car. They're transit dependent. And so if you're going to put choice riders on that bus, you got to at least reward them. You're not at a major congestion point where it's like the best way to go into Manhattan, but you do have people who are willing to ride the bus and do the right thing. Just, we need to respect them a little bit. That's all.
Sounds like a great project for some of our data analytics professors and students to look at.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any questions in the chat? Okay. Well, now's the time to get down to the real work. We're going to have 3 working sessions, and Michelle's going to have to help me with the room numbers. But the P4, if any of you have been around for a while, we used to say P3. Now we're at P4. Public-private philanthropic partnerships. That's going to be led by Brian. and they're going to discuss the development of partnerships and cross-sector resources to execute these advanced mobility projects. So if you're interested in that, Brian is your guy, and Michelle will tell you what room number.
Yes. So that, actually, if we advance the slides just a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Slide that has-
Do I have the slide? Okay, you can tell I used to be the mayor. I didn't advance my own slides, sorry.
So the grocery store mobility hub will be in this auditorium. Then we're gonna put the AB pilot projects group, which will be led by Kelly. That's gonna be in Helm 220, so up here on the second floor. And then the P4 partnerships group that's gonna be led by Brian is going to Helm 121, which is on the first floor.
Okay, so after you finish your work, you're going to come back here and report out. So we need you to work hard, come back, and let us get ready to execute this great plan that has been put together for over the years with all of us people in this room. Thank you very much. See you in a bit.
You also received a form when you came in.
Oh, yes.
For you to fill it in.
Fill out your forms that you got when you came in. Yes.
To say where you'll be willing to be involved. Okay.
All right, so the idea of a mobility hub, just in brief, well, there's a picture of it there. This particular idea is focused on a grocery store, but it doesn't need to be focused on a grocery store, but it's really just a point of departure for transportation. A traditional hub is, where two buses come together. A bigger hub is where, a bunch of people wait to do it. Bigger bus, a plane, a boat, whatever. That's a hub, right? But the idea here is that many more, let's call them micro hubs, are essential for many cities for folks to be able to have access to not just emerging forms of mobility, but basic forms of mobility. So yes, you may have heard about micro mobility hubs or other micro hubs in big cities as being a thing. They've been built and deployed and implemented. And it really just, at an intersection, in a parking lot, in a convenient point, there might be a chair station, there's maybe a scooter dock. It could be where a dial-a-ride bus or paratransit vehicle comes in regularly. Hopefully there's a bus stop nearby. If it's connected to a more advanced form of transit, great. Folks will have car share there. Sometimes even a really dedicated, even signed, ride share pickup station, like with even a cover. And sometimes, as we just were talking at the end of the last session, microtransit is a big part of this. And microtransit can often be facilitated with these ride share type vehicles more count to the user. So it's basically what a microtransit is. Instead of me, paying $12 to get into downtown, it may only cost me $3 or $4. Because a microtransit company has an agreement with the transit agency, they get a little bit of subsidy, but they're only running in certain kind of general routes and corridors. Hopefully those that the bus itself isn't serving, and especially hopefully where people are not being well served or connected to all those things that I was talking about. And in this case, a grocery store happened to be a location where a lot of people needed to be connected to regularly. We heard this through surveys, we heard this through our own evaluation of just food deserts across Tulsa, essentially, that there's large swaths, particularly in North Tulsa, where folks can't get healthy grocery foods. A lot of food is just sold in like dollar type stores. Maybe it's part of a superstore type grocery, but oftentimes it's just lower quality, less fresh, less healthy food, which perpetuates a lot of the imbalance that the region saw, like huge differences in life expectancy. Southern Tulsa significantly longer than Northern Tulsa. Like that's just one of the many pieces of data that popped up. So having a mobility hub at a grocery store is a way to be able to say, well, for folks who can't drive or don't want to afford to drive or actually just live nearby, to be able to have connections there. And sometimes those can even be the next level, which is automated connections. Okay, you could actually see one of these low-speed shuttles, even takes a little while getting a grandmother who can't walk very well into the grocery store. Or at night, shown in the middle of this picture, a robot taking the food to somebody's home to be cooked, or once a week on the weekends or something like that. Great way to demonstrate a lot of these technologies. Really, a great opportunity for providers, for people who would be receiving goods, and potentially even for a grocery store. So Oasis, and nobody from Oasis is here.
I don't believe so, because I think they're in this group, but
Right.
I actually did want to mention and just point out that there is a project that Oasis is, so Oasis, the Oasis project is a nonprofit that runs the Oasis grocery store, so that's kind of a distinction there, but the Oasis project is applying for a grant to the Department of Energy right now. It's called the Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize, and they're hoping to get these vehicles for their grocery stores to serve as delivery and transit. They want to switch off uses or complete it to be. So those vehicles need to be electric. So the idea would be to have some electric vehicles that would serve both transportation services and delivery services for Oasis Fresh Markets.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're working on that right now. I think they're finishing up, or they might have just finished up their application. So I don't know if that'd be a bouncing point for a discussion, potentially building on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, you're reporting that.
Yeah, there I am.
Because you know that already.
Yeah.
That's stellar. Second,
Oh,
you just got out of a hot seat.
So question about, so will they be doing like microtransit where they have an Uber type service and people can request transportation?
What it is that they're proposing, I think that they're kind of, I'm actually not sure exactly the way that it's trying to be set out, but I know that they want to be able to, for the pilots to look at, how does it work out to try both delivery service and then, what are the results from the transit type service? So I would imagine that it's something like maybe you can schedule a time, or maybe you can call it and it'll come at, I'm not sure how that'll end up working, but yeah, it's actually a really interesting.
Yeah.
And to whom are they applying to?
It's the DOE. Yeah, it's an inclusive energy innovation.
So what? So that's something that they need to still hear on. And
Yeah,
it's-
they haven't been approved.
It's more or less seed funding for something.
Yes, and actually that's a good point, because it's seed funding for the first year if they get approved with the most recent round that they just submitted to. So if they win for the first phase of this prize, they get a year and they get, I want to say, a couple $100,000 to run a pilot program for a year or to work on the development of a program, which will then be reevaluated in the phase 2 application and potentially funded for further years.
Oh, well, that's good, at least. We don't know about necessarily how many years, but at the very least, it's something that kickstarts it. What would be a way to make something like this sort of self-sustaining on its own or self-financed on its own? What are the tools that, maybe even back up, what are the obstacles we have to get rid of? So for instance, Oasis, at the very top, let's say they're going to do this, they're going to, I don't know, do something like this, but sort of put this all together, they have to wipe out 20 front door parking spaces, bring in some of this, hypothetical infrastructure as shown on screen. They can apply for a grant for money, but is there actually an obstacle in the city or cities that say, well, no, actually, you need to have those spaces by the front door, or you have a minimum parking requirement, or anything you put in is going to need X, Y, Z in terms of infrastructure from inspectional services. So are there obvious obstacles that we should be worried about?
Yes. You just named a bunch of them.
Oh, boy.
And some others are, emergency vehicle access or sanitation access, right of way.
I would think anything though, if it were to go before, because that all would go before like a planning commission. Does Tulsa have planning commission the same as Broken Arrow? Okay, I didn't know if it was all called the same thing. So it would have to go planning commission and council, but I mean, those are things that if they have a reason for, for an exception, we're always gonna look at that because just those parking places, obviously for emergency vehicles, you can't do anything about that, but that's not gonna keep an emergency. There's nothing about that that keeps an emergency vehicle from accessing.
Whatever the form is, though, it's something you have to have reviewed still. Like a fire has to come in and say that's okay. And every single one of these regulatory steps, it's just like opening up any building, I
Yeah,
guess.
it can be at the whims of political preference as well. If
What are you
ABC
saying?
company comes in and says, we want to do this, but they don't have the same political influence as XYZ company, they might not get that special exception. So in order to have a level playing field, you have to change the ordinances and the code. And by doing so, you're going to encourage more investment because you look like you have an open mindset and a future looking vision for your community, so they're more apt to invest in your community instead of running everything through Board of Adjustments, because that's
Right.
like the worst.
Yeah, I
thing.
think it's a lot easier to, obviously BA smaller, so it's much easier to get things done than in Tulsa.
One thing I'm curious about when we're talking about this hub, how centralized does the hub location exactly need to be? Because I know that there's a path that bikers can use, well, actually, excuse me, I don't know about bikers because I'm thinking of the sidewalk right now, so it may or may not be on the rules right there. But there's a sidewalk that goes right between Oasis and the road along there. I think it's Florida. But anywho, there's a Tulsa transit stop right there. So we've already got bus service almost right up to Oasis. There isn't like an accessible entrance if someone were to get off the bus and need like a ramp to go all the way up. I don't believe that exists, or it might be a long way around. But I'm just thinking, if they were to include some of these other components, like how centralized does all of this need to be, or can it be spread out kind of across the Oasis?
It can be spread out. I think that's funny. If you look in the background, this was a save a lot. I don't know if this is where Oasis moved in or not.
This is out north, kind of by the highway.
Yeah. So in the background, you actually can see a bus shelter and a Tulsa Transit bus, right? So this already knew that there was a distance between the two. One of the things that worked very successfully for Boston's hubs is simply just signing and visibility. So if you have a consistent totem sign, color, and message, maybe even lighting to connect pieces, that's all you really need. One of the most important things to integrate is the digital information. And that's also a big hurdle. So we all can pull up a phone and we can sort of know, okay, what's there. Not everybody has a phone. Sometimes people have a hard time reading that phone, as I'm starting to. And sometimes, it's just not fast enough service to understand, or as in the case of me, I couldn't even get here today without knowing where on the map this building was, because the address, for whatever reason, wouldn't click into either TNC's app. I have no idea why. So those little kinds of technological barriers mean that the access for many people can be completely hindered. So this is the idea of mobility as a service. I think it's not one of the bullets, but the idea is that it's a one-stop thing. But for many, it's not a phone. It's actually got to be just a good schedule, a good piece of information of what numbers to call, or ideally a display that shows all those forms of transportation. Now that's
Like a kiosk.
like a kiosk that shows it all, and even if it's not on one map, it's a kiosk that lets you quickly pull up Uber, quickly pull up Lyft, or quickly pull up Tulsa Transit, or here's the next autonomous shuttle or whatever. That's a big part of it, but no, it doesn't need to be in one tight spot.
It's like all out in the front door of the.
Yeah, well, like grocers, are they gonna want it right in front? You even mocked up the sign on the front there, mobility hub on the front door. But Oasis sounds like a willing partner for something like this. That doesn't need to be at their front door. Their side door would be great, halfway across the parking lot, but no further would be stellar, that kind of thing.
I want to talk about the struggle, but before I do that, I want to mention that the city has a healthy neighborhood overlay for North Tulsa, which actually decentralizes dollar stores. Like they make zoning restrictions to make dollar store within a certain distance. That is passed in 2018. And this is to incentivize other healthy food sources. So that is passed in 2015.
So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's a good thing because the healthy food sources cannot compete with dollar stores.
Right.
If you have a dollar store, they have it on $1, whether it's healthy or not. So people obviously go there. And I actually live on 67 in Peoria and I have a dollar store just opposite of my apartment complex. I find it useful because if I need something, I can go there, so that's helpful. But if that was my only option to have, I wouldn't like that. I'd much rather pay maybe 10 cents more and get more options and healthier food. So I think that's it.
Tulsa engaged with like Dollar General?
I don't know.
Because, you know, we identified, they proposed to build a new Dollar General in Tahlequah. We engaged them right up front with multiple partners. And talked about how the spot they're going is a food desert. And we were able to get them to offer fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that in that store by engaging and showing how much the community wanted that. Brought them to coalition meetings and just invited them to see the neighborhood that they're going into. And they ended up building I don't know if it was a prototype store or not, but they had fruits and vegetables and all the offerings. And it was awesome. I mean, they were pretty good to work with.
And they have a lot of stores in other states that are like what you're talking about. That
Yeah, I think it's just
because we engage them as well.
because I had the same thing with them as far as their parking, stormwater detention, because they wanted to, put above surface stormwater taking up even more land area, and so we were able to put it underground and just, they worked with us because they wanted that location because there wasn't any competition, obviously, and there was a lot of population that was going to use their services. So I don't know, rather than just outright ban them, maybe it's something that we should look at working with them on.
The overlay doesn't necessarily ban them, it just creates a little restriction for
Hurdles.
them to be built so close to one another.
How many, is it like so many feet or so many blocks?
Yeah,
Or-
I think so. I don't recall.
We did that with pot shops broken here.
And
Of course, now there's not as many.
struggle there in North Tulsa is that there are so many stores and they want to come in that area because they know that people do not have mobility. They cannot go anywhere else. If they just put a store there, people would come there even if do not have healthy food.
We started out as a complete adversary with them because they kept all north, south, east, and west of our community. As soon as you cross the city limits and you're out of the municipal limits, that's where they built their store. And so every gateway in our community, there was a Dollar General. That we weren't getting any kind of sales tax revenue on, and we couldn't impose any kind of development standards on them. So they were really challenging to us at the beginning, but in the end, flipped around.
So would you never want a mobility hub at a Dollar General as a result? Or maybe
I think that's
another business who might say, hey, why not? Right? So, it doesn't just happen overnight, but it doesn't actually take a lot. Like this is probably a fancy looking mobility hub. Mobility hubs, the way Boston has conceived them, are really just that they're on a map and there's a few signs. So when you arrive, you kind of know where you can get a service. That's really all it is. It can be fancier, it can be more. I think the bigger issue is more that you've got to be able to make sure the services and then the partners align. So, there's not car share yet in Tulsa that I recall, but if there were to be, and there are peer-to-peer versions of it. So car share, if you've heard of Zipcar, which is basically you rent a car by an hour or half hour instead of by the day, and they're parked in the neighborhood. But there's
Some random cars just parked in your neighborhood?
Yeah.
But a company runs that car.
Yeah, it's currently Zipcar was bought by Avis a few years ago, but basically, and when I travel, I will very frequently get off the plane, take a taxi or a ride share into wherever I'm spending the night. But if I'm doing work the next day, I'll just pick a borrowed car up. If some meeting as I walk around, I take the borrowed car and I go to a meeting, and that kind of a thing. But they can often be done on a peer-to-peer basis, which is just residential cars. Anybody that owns offer it out.
Like
And
Airbnb.
you basically
Oh,
rent
what's
your
the
car.
one? There's that one you rent cars, it's people own it. My daughter always does that.
Relay rides is one that I'm aware of. There's others though.
Different, but yeah, it's super interesting.
That's
It's
almost
girls.
easier to develop. It's almost easier to develop than to get an existing rideshare provider such as Uber or Lyft to go to this spot versus halfway across the parking lot or not at all.
Right.
Like basically to put a geofence on a hub so that a rideshare driver knows they're going to the Oasis Hub C. And that this is the spot where they're going to either catch their ride or drop off their ride. And the advantage of doing that is the rideshare is still basically the most expensive way to get there. So it can be used for maybe a portion of the trip. So maybe it's used when you're carrying a lot of groceries, or it's used when you've got a few friends. But if you had to get there by yourself or you're leaving by yourself, it may not be the other end of the trip that you want. So then the other end of the trip may still just be transit. So obviously we need to know that there's a transit schedule or a microtransit service, which is something that the city's working on. But even just getting this machine to have a bike there is a big deal. So all those different inter-service agreements, who on behalf of Oasis is going to try to make sure those inter-service agreements happen year after year? That there isn't somebody who just walks away from it. And maybe they do, but then you need to replace them with another provider. How does that kind of communication happen? And who's willing to be that champion for Oasis? Is Oasis going to have a manager to do this?
I almost wonder if that would be an example of something you could work in partnership for. I don't know if Oasis has the right staff, and I don't know how much time this would typically take in a given year to work on this type of thing, but maybe they could partner with Tulsa Transit. Maybe they could partner with, there's another group in town called Lotus that works on providing mobility for certain groups, especially mental health services. I think that there are some organizations around here who could potentially, if it's not a huge chunk of time they would be dedicating to that, to partner with, one or two mobility hubs per year.
I love the idea about having some grocery hub or mobility hub. But I think as travel, you'd have most is to get to the mobility hub. I mean, we're talking about ride share, but which would probably be expensive. And bike, I mean, we cannot do groceries on bike. We cannot have grocery and ride our bike. You cannot
Not with
walk
your
with
current bikes. There are cargo bikes.
Mhm.
So, that could become part of this machine system.
If you do a small amount of grocery, but if you buy a lot of groceries,
Right, of course, right.
and it's also difficult with transit. I think so I commute to work by bus, but I go grocery by car.
Right.
Just because it's convenient to do so. But I used to use bus for grocery, and it's just so difficult to do.
I heard that Tulsa Transit had equipped some buses to be better for carrying food. Is that true? Not sure how.
So I ride the Peoria BRT. I do not see any particular accommodation for that.
And it was just one line somewhere. Okay.
So I think that the thing we struggle most is how can we look into fancy things and technologies and how can that help us, but we ignore very basic things. Like just if we look at this picture, I think this we have everything in here, but I think that the thing that will help most if we have if you could just ride your card, like the card that you take from the shop to the bus stop. None of the store allows that. Like if we could shop Walmart, you have to.
The wheel locks as soon as you get close. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But where do you go from there? You have to pick up the bags and go to the bus stop. That didn't do. Right. So I would think that that's something very easy to do, but that would help a lot with a lot of people. The other thing I can think of is, yeah, maybe having some accommodation on the bus. That if you have a card, yeah, you can accommodate that. Maybe it doesn't need to go at the same time with the passenger. Maybe have something beside the seating area, like on the side, so you can like load your stuff and then lock it, and then get on the bus and get up and take it off. I think these are.
Take it off from the outside.
This may be the difficult thing, but I think having a card stop at beside the bus stop would probably be a simple thing to do. It wouldn't cost any money. I would imagine it would help a lot. I feel that a lot. That yeah. Sometimes what I did is I did a bad thing. I took my card off to the side of their parking lot, and I just left it there, just because it was heavy. I just did it. I think this could help.
And it's an important point too, like even at Oasis, like they have grocery carts, I'm sure, and they're not gonna wanna lose them across the parking lot. They're embracing the fact that that's actually a Tulsa transit stop, so that means they need to know that their cart guy is going to get them from across the parking lot.
I always wonder if this is a challenge that could be overcome with some kind of new solution, like everyone, or at least I try to bring my reusable bag with me when I go to the grocery store. I'm thinking, what if there was something I had that rolled that I could then put maybe I shop with it, and then all my groceries stay in there when I head out of the grocery store, and it's easy to bring onto a bus or something. I'm not sure if that exists or if that.
There's a lot of really neat carts that are fold up that are easy.
Yeah. Or
Just
maybe
kidding, buy one.
instead of personal ownership, maybe that could be a service that the grocery store could offer. And they could, have like a carry your groceries home, whatever it is. It could be like a subscription or something included with the mobility package.
Well, and this is where delivery bots kind of are the emerging opportunity now, and a very simple use case for Oasis is just a 1 or 2 pilot bots going from the end of the grocery store aisles, more or less, right outside the door to the bus stop. That's it. All they're doing is shuttling over, and you're walking there however you want alongside the robot, riding on the front of it. I don't think they do that. Whatever it is, knowing that that's how your weight was carried to the bus. So something as simple as that could be a simple.
I'm gonna go shop there just so I can have the robot take stuff.
But you mentioned another point is the other end of the trip. So getting out is a hassle, but being able to get there is also something like, okay, there's a hub, I can use these other forms of transportation. How do I get those other forms of transportation to come to me? So how do, obviously knowing that there's a shared bike nearby is one way of doing it. Obviously being able to dial up a microtransit provider is another, but having some sort of regular contact so that particularly somebody who it's difficult to make this trip can very easily get that trip taken care of, not necessarily by riding a bike.
And that's our, what we're dealing with the Broken Arrow is just people being able to get to where the busing is. And because my concern, quite frankly, is mostly with disabled and seniors. I mean, that's who I want to make sure we're servicing first. And everyone's important, but those people, I don't want them to just be stuck at home having to get things delivered. And I mean, there's something about, I mean, where we live, community is, part of that is going to the grocery store, being out among people. And that's important for elderly and disabled. And so being able to get to those places is very important.
So microtransit is a great opportunity as compared to traditional paratransit because the senior usually, waits until the Thursday when the, community bus is running or schedules 2 days in advance. What is actually a fairly expensive paratransit ride, $5, or I don't know what the going rate is in this area, but just to be able to go get groceries. And it's time consuming and sometimes the delays, your stuff melts. It just doesn't work. So microtransit is the same flexibility, but scheduled the moment that you need it. That's a great opportunity, but as we already know, to really make it work cost effectively across the region, takes some time, a lot of support, a lot of advertising. Tulsa Transit's not ready to launch it for a year. Could a grocery store have a single microtransit vehicle that does the same thing? It's an operator, it's a person. It's like a community ride. They operate within a radius and they bring people to there that day, more or less on demand, or I can't get there until 1, but I will pick you up at 1, that kind of thing. It's an opportunity for somebody to develop as a business. Is it worth it to Oasis? Like that's the part where, in the grocery world, or in the world of going to a hub in the middle of a parking lot where it isn't even a grocery store, is there a way to pay for somebody to provide those types of reciprocal services? Is there a way to incentivize somebody to operate a mini microtransit system in a neighborhood?
And Tom, well, we subsidize the city used Cowboys area transit. I think our donation was 40,000 a year for the private service across the entire community. It was $1. But sometimes you have to wait an hour and a half. So if you were trying to meet an appointment or something like that, then it wasn't your most reliable definitive solution. You're eventually going to get it. Cowboys, EOS, we just call it the Cats bus. And they continued to grow.
We're doing that. We actually are buying autonomous vehicles for some things, more as like a trolley type thing. But we're in the middle of a study for microtransit right now.
Good.
Yeah. And we have a very, very active senior center in BA that has some transportation, but not near what is needed.
And that's what it started at.
Yeah.
With seniors and people with disabilities, because they're all ADA compliant. They have their ramps and all that. And then it just expanded because we saw a need, because there are so many people without access to the vehicle.
And this is a surprise. First of all, does Tulsa Transit even run there? So you're just doing
They do, but
express route?
they're express route, and actually they just canceled one of them because it's so hard. People that need that, how do they get to it?
This is a worsening problem because so much, I scorned the auto orientation of the region earlier. Truthfully, it's problematic for many folks that wind up dependent on their lives, on a car, aging in place, in a suburban home, needing to drive and suddenly can't. And they don't have a bailout. And so now they're otherwise were productive members of society, thinking everything was just fine, putting kids through college, taking care, and suddenly they're the transit dependent. The bus isn't there. And so microtransit needs continue to grow. The population bubble is continuing to age. The boomers are a huge problem for access now. A lot of them have moved into walkable downtowns, but most of them are still in those kinds of places. The microtransit needs will only persist and grow. Automated shuttles might save us, but not anymore.
Go ahead. So in addition to ensuring micromobility so that people can come to the grocery stores, you can also invest more in the delivery system.
Yes.
I think the pandemic has shown that it's got a lot. I use pickup service and delivery service more than I used to before. Let's say that the city or some part keeps the money for Uber. So how much would it cost? $10 maybe. So if you go back and forth, it's $20. But if you give him a Walmart annual membership, that costs another $10. And you get that we said,
Where you're going with that is, I wonder if this is, dealing with the devil, Amazon comes to everybody's home no matter where. Why can't they be a platform for delivery? Honestly, they do have a partnership with Whole Foods. Yeah. But they're not really doing that yet. But is that something that drives up the food costs and makes it just people who can afford it who are getting that nice Amazon food? This is a challenge to be able to make these things. It's probably the biggest challenge.
I've been surprised at how, whenever I first started getting delivery from like Resource and Walmart, I didn't want to do anything. I want to do that myself, but I gradually let them know, like, I'm surprised. It's actually been fine.
So one of the key questions that we want to try to answer is, who are the champions to make this thing happen? Maybe for this particular one, Oasis is the champion. My brain is telling me there needs to be somebody else besides that. Is it the transit agency? Is it government? Is it neighborhood organizations? Is it faith-based organizations? What is it? Is it champions who recognizing that, yes, there needs to be a lot of subsidy for all this stuff until they know how to get the players? Who's going to be there when Oasis's contracts go away? And Oasis doesn't know exactly how to negotiate some of these contracts, so who's going to help them? So can an organization like INCOG be at least involved somewhat? I mean, obviously, Michelle knew a fair amount of what was going on, but it's probably not her role or anybody's position to actually do that. But maybe it needs to be that somebody is paying attention to this. And it's actually a program. It's a suite of options that any grocery store, maybe any other location, can sort of sign up for.
And it can be part of an ongoing initiative for the city, that if you do this, you get some sort of special taxes or something.
Or at least recognition.
Exactly.
At least bullhorn.
Yes.
Publications. Oasis is doing this.
It's
hard to get away with
attracts more people. And it's attracts more people to that payment.
Yeah, well, that's what it's about. Come and shop without your car. Take care of yourself.
Incentivize people to buy electric vehicles, you should use incentives.
We need, that's unfortunate that it was.
But not from the city.
Yeah.
It's from taxes though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our system, unfortunately, whether it's through politics, through just history and tradition, and through an entire transportation system that ripped up rails and paved for automobiles a long time ago, is not used to those types of incentives. It doesn't fit in our brains. We instead look at the huge amount of subsidy that goes to transit and all the, billions spent every year on the FTA with a huge cost per rider, ignoring the estimated over $1 trillion every year that is put in just to subsidize driving. Because we can't even believe it. We can't even understand the math that those few $100 million that's going to transit every year is actually just a drop in the bucket compared to the $1 trillion that lets us get this thing that we thought was an inalienable right, which is to drive, to park, to use the land, the emergency services. Fire departments respond to crashes 100 times more than they do to fires. That all the land, most of the environmental waste is all being paid for because of the impact of the car. And those are all hidden costs.
Well,
it would be great. And yes, some businesses figure it out. But it's not, when the gas prices go up, we start to see a little bit of this. We start saying, oh, maybe I should do something more economical. We're not even seeing a fraction of the actual cost of driving.
Much of that is paid for. Yes, you're correct.
Yes and no.
There is astronomical dollars, but there's a great deal of that that's spread out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the 50 cents a mile average, the theory that covers everything that we ever pay for, you start to add that up, and that's what, you bill out. It's your discount on taxes, right? 57 cents a mile. Yeah,
Well, it's
57
your
cents.
business If you write it on business.
Well, yeah,
You
but
don't
then,
get to do that just like in random.
most people don't, but that 57 cents a mile is basically to cover all of the costs that are known for driving. But the real cost in order to support those systems is several dollars.
You're paid for different too. I didn't realize that.
And nobody thinks you'd spend 57. I mean, average commute 20 miles, nobody thinks
You
about.
don't,
You're not
you
paying
don't
that
spend
kind
that
of
much,
money.
but you won that mileage because you make. Everyone that
Well,
writes
People
off, they
expensive,
get-
they can write it off, as consultants make some money
I'm not
on it,
ahead on that deal.
but it's still just a fraction of the cost.
I think the highways of the federal system is mostly funded through, or major portion funded through the tax generated from the subsidy of Tulsa state tax.
Kelly's group, and I
So
popped in there. She
our
knows
state,
overweight.
most of us recent work has been funded by
Having a
the
good meeting.
and that's the property tax and sales tax. So everybody's paying for it, not just for Tulsa particularly, everyone is paying for only this people.
But to go back to like, for instance, making the economic decision to subsidize a grocery store-based microtransit and or a demonstrator delivery robot and or a hub of this machine that was just a little bit beyond where they wanted to go. Those dollars usually will pay back in the broader sense by reducing other miles traveled and its impact on people's budgets and wear and tear, reducing healthcare costs because of just healthier eating, and reducing for many just extra tax burden, transportation costs, et cetera. I mean, for many folks, you can now survive a family on a smaller property. You can actually survive in an area that has less property taxes, and that impacts your bottom line too. So, I mean, there's, in the end, being able to subsidize shared forms of mobility just because they're shared automatically pays off to some extent. So even though it's still a subsidy, it's a significantly better subsidy than me driving alone for every milk or bag of sugar that I forgot.
Do you, especially if you're really interested in working with Oasis specifically, I know some cities, they sort of use their food banks as sort of a centralized area to commute people to grocery stores. And there's a food bank out north that's literally maybe like a little van or something at the food bank that goes and picks people up throughout the neighborhood to drop them off at the grocery store and just kind of have like a time allotment system maybe set up in place where people can schedule a pickup and then get the groceries and take it back to whatever destination that they were picked up from or something like that.
I mean, that's a good, and that kind of concludes on the primary and theme of this whole thing. Which is part of like I said earlier, that's the senior center, you say in Broken Arrow, that's an important need, obviously, the transit. And an independent microtransit operator. There's a lot of
All right, welcome back. I don't know about your group, but ours was amazing. And there was a lot of great engagement and people ready for next steps. So as I said earlier, I think this kind of collaborative partnership is what's going to take Tulsa to the forefront in advanced mobility. We want to be mindful of your time, but I know we want to report out from the various sessions. So I will call on my session leader, Kelly, to report out from the autonomous vehicle. I took the notes, but you got to report out. You'll never be able to read this.
So we had a great conversation, and we got to do what I always like to do, which is to ask everybody in the room, why do you care about this? And just make our old boss just want to fall over and die. She's going to do it again. But it was a wonderful conversation, and from it, we identified some key parameters for thinking about pilots, some key policy issues that need to be looked at around thinking about these pilots, and most importantly, some parameters, some ways in which we might look at AV pilots. One from looking at University of Tulsa as a campus environment, looking at the airport in terms of its particular sets of use cases. How do we engage on freight issue? Tinto Capital volunteered to reconvene the group and give them lunch. So, and it'll be a great lunch, I'm sure. We will be pulling together the notes that Dean Taylor put together, and we'll synopsize them for the whole group, and we'll concentrate them. I will give them a more expanded version for our working group, but it was a terrific session. And then I would just add that Jason and I have some homework, which is we'll be briefing the mayor and his staff, and there's been an ask for what are the things that the city can do to advance, in particular, these AV pilots, but in those sets of considerations. So it's awesome. I want to give a shout out to our traffic engineers.
Yes.
So in my spare time, I've been working on an AV and infrastructure project, and your traffic engineers are so ahead of the curve on thinking about what are the things that are the ways that the infrastructure might enable AVs, but also what are the impacts and how do we manage this infrastructure over a 20-year time period in the meantime. So hats off to you guys.
Yes. So an issue that we all know is really important to Tulsa is tackling food deserts and access and food insecurity. And so Jason Schreiber, if you will lead the comments on the grocery store mobility.
I've already nominated Michelle.
Okay.
Michelle, and then Chrissy.
Michelle. Okay.
I'm going to report on the first half that I was present for. But yeah, so we were able to outline some potential barriers and then, a few opportunities. And one thing we noted is that we are aware that the Oasis Project, which is the nonprofit that runs the Oasis grocery store in Tulsa, that they are already applying for a Department of Energy inclusive energy inclusion ties right now to try to get more access to transportation to their grocery store, as well as run delivery services for their store. So we were just kind of discussing ways that potentially, work to piggyback off of that initiative. And, we talked about, how decentralized does a mobility hub need to be? And it turns out it doesn't necessarily have to be decentralized. We could use the existing Tulsa Transit stop that's there. There could be micro-mobility hubs there where you have your ride-up electric bikes and this machine, or electric scooters and this machine bikes. And so I think we moved into a discussion of, what are some building code restrictions that might impact, might be a barrier to getting these up and running, like fire lanes. Would we be allowed to have some kind of mobility service right up to the front of the building, or would there be an issue with that? There might be barriers to exploring there. But yeah, I thought that it was a pretty good collection of opportunities and potential setbacks to that we can definitely move forward with. And I don't know if we had another group member who had some other notes from the second half of the discussion.
I think you pretty well covered it. I feel like I have to say something now because you told me I had to. So, what I love is the cooperation that we have with Tulsa Transit and Broken Arrow. And so I look at everything from a little bit of a different lens because I'm looking at it as someone that in Broken Arrow that wants to always be in a partnership with Tulsa because we need that. And so something that we did talk about is those partnerships of having, how can the city work with private entities to make that easier? How can we how can we work on funding together, not just with private business owners, but also with we have Broken Arrow neighbors. So places like that we could make sure that we're providing transportation to where people really need to go. But a grocery store seems to be a logical place because everyone needs groceries. And, even though nowadays we can get everything delivered to our house, I believe there's still a lot of value in community
and actually going to a grocery store and seeing people. And that's a really important thing for people. So it just really sparked a lot of ideas. This is something I'm really passionate about in our city, especially for, we're already working on some things. We actually have a study, a microtransit study we're doing right now that we have a consultant working on, but we have some autonomous vehicles that'll be coming to our city soon. And we're working just on that microtransit thing. So to help specifically with our disabled and also with our seniors, because we want to make sure that they're getting to the places that they need to go first and foremost. So just this partnership, it's super important. And also just knowing, you know what, we all can learn something from each other. And we all, I mean, as elected officials and private business owners, we all can be working together to help each other make our communities better. No matter, you know, Tulsa, you know, Broken Arrow, Bigby, Owasso, all of us need each other.
Thanks, great job. And I'm glad you mentioned seniors too. I'm not saying my age, but our friends from Oxley Health Sciences Center and another in our group also mentioned the importance of mobility for seniors and keeping quality of life for seniors who maybe we don't want on the road, but we want to make sure they can be on the road, and those that are sight impaired and otherwise. So thank you for mentioning that. Brian, are you going to give your report out on P4s?
Yeah, we came up with a plan to put together a partnership for the development of the commuter rail line corridor that connects Jinx, downtown Tulsa, and Broken Arrow.
Wow. Okay.
And it's happening when?
Yeah.
So the case scenario was it costs $10 million to get this to happen. How do you get your philanthropic contribution, your private sector contribution, and your public sector contribution on board to generate enough capital investment to go after the hundreds of millions of dollars that are available through the IIJA, the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, great job.
Yeah.
That short and powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we identified the challenges and we put together a solid strategy. I don't have it written down, but I got it here and I can put it on paper and I can send it to you later.
Well done. I think this was a very successful day. So thanks to our consultants, thanks to everyone in the room, to Michelle for her great leadership. And when you came into the room, you should have received a paper titled The Path Forward. And that paper asks you to decide and to know what capacity you'd like to continue helping us move this plan forward. If you didn't fill it out yet, Michelle will not let you leave the room until you have completed it. So we do lock the building up at some point. So you'll want to complete that and help us.
Stay overnight.
Yeah, exactly. I can send in some pizza. So anyway, let Michelle know if you didn't receive one of those, grab them from her. And I just want to thank all of you for your participation. It was a great, diverse group with such incredible knowledge and passion. And I believe the next steps are upon us. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your leadership. And let's move forward on Tulsa's mobility innovation strategy. Thank you.